the idea, again, of this virus, the kickoff of our country's reaction to the virus, our kickoff started with bad data. Bad models, bad data. Made bad policies as a result. So one thing that's happened as we're moving to open the country up, we had even the head of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, he is saying, well, U.S. is ready to open up, but he says he does predict thousands more of contact tracers. The basic idea is start to track and trace the American people so that you can figure out who has the virus, who they've been around, who might be contagious. It's a whole notion of an emergency action we have never done with the flu, never done with other viruses, that says we're going to track every single person. So the idea coming out, it is coming out of Washington, coming out of the CDC, and the notion that track and trace is one way we can speed up opening up, because if we open up the country, open up businesses, open up freedom, open up stores and everything else in life, we better have a very robust track and trace system in place. This is what CDC says. I think that is profoundly wrong. I think track and trace is another egregious interference with the right of people to live in freedom. But we have this track and trace thing going on in this country, even in the great state of Texas. And we have, Texas normally the leader in liberty, but we have track and trace. We had our governor just spend $300 million to hire some company to put in place tracking and tracing in the public schools all over the state. It's just that's just to put the system in place, not to implement it. People can volunteer, they're being trained, so they're calling people up. Hey, I hear, so you were over at, the grocery store yesterday, and turns out while you were there 2 aisles over, Suzuki was there, and she's been diagnosed and said, we think you're sick. It is interfering with the individual right of a person to live their life freely because the government's tracking everything. Now, I want to hit some really, really vital points about that. A very good friend of mine who is a member of a state legislature where that state is putting in place tracking and tracing, and he's Republican and he's getting pushback. People are saying, we don't want to be tracked and traced. Why are you doing this? This is not okay. And so he came back with a little explanation that I don't want to identify him because I didn't ask him if I could do this, but I want to identify or tell you what he had to say about why this track and trace is really kind of cool. It's okay. Conservatives should not mind. He says, well, number one, Trump seems to think it's a good idea. He's saying, it is completely voluntary. That's one defense. Well, it's completely voluntary. You don't want to do track and trace, don't do track and trace. Okay, keep that in mind. It's not going to be voluntary if people, I'm going to tell you, if we get pushback and most people won't do it in this state, they won't keep it voluntary. He's claiming it's voluntary. Is there a risk for invasion of privacy or divulging of personal information? He goes, yeah, his answer from this governor, this Republican governor in his state, well, yeah, but, we don't have that much privacy anyway. Everybody's always spying on your phone. Everyone knows what you do. The country already is, we're all spied on. Not that big a difference, not that big a deal. Will everyone have to download an app? No, you don't have to. You don't want the app, you don't have to. So it's voluntary. You don't have to get the app. Will there be a permanent database or registry for those who test positive? Oh, no, not going to be that. No. Okay. Will the program track citizens' movements and location by satellite? Oh, no. Will there be any government surveillance by those not willingly cooperating with a contact tracing system? Oh, no. Will there be any authority to force individuals to quarantine if they test positive for the virus? No. They're not going to force quarantine. Any chance CPS would be called, Child Protective Services would be called, to take your children out of your home if someone in the home tested positive? No. Okay. And he ends up by saying, look, everyone's getting overwrought. This is not a big deal. Contact tracing is just a way to help the government, help you. It's all about the government helping you and helping the citizens, protecting citizens. Don't worry about it. And so ends with this point. He says, the devil's in the details, perfectly agrees. You could have details ultimately come out in the state he's in that would make it a more egregious invasion of privacy, and also trust but verify. Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on things. I want to counter all those points. much as I love this guy, friend of mine, state rep in another state, I want to tell you that we need to be extremely alert to this idea of tracking and tracing. And I want to address with you some of the arguments I hear from people saying, hey, how could you oppose tracking and tracing? It's just another way to keep us safe. They're just trying to help us. Why are you concerned? One answer you get is, well, if we can save just one life. Isn't it worth it to you? So you lose a little privacy. If you can save just one life, isn't it worth it? And I want you to think about that. Frankly, this argument appeals to women. But let me give you a counter to that. If we in America banned all driving, nobody can drive in cars anymore, we would save 1.25 million Americans every year. That's the average number of Americans killed in car accidents every year, 1.25 million. And so you say, well, this contact tracing, bearing in mind, coronavirus has a 98 to 99% survival rate. So it's under 1%, even in New York, with the worst situation in the whole country. New York's lethality rate, 0.1399, not even 0.14. For the same reason, we're not going to ban driving, even though it could save over 1 million lives. We're not going to submit to tracking and tracing. We're not going to surrender our liberty and surrender our freedom in order to save just one life. Would you agree to the government that they can track where you go, keep track of which restaurants you ate at, who was at that restaurant? You are being tracked and traced. All of my friends honestly kind of struck me as goody two-shoes answers, kind of like, oh no, just because the government's tracking and tracing, they would never keep this data. Does the government ever throw any data away? Seriously? Does any entity throw any information away? The idea that you could trust the government not to create a database is absurd. The idea that right now you say, well, it's voluntary, so you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Well, if not enough people cooperate, if very few are willing to be tracked and traced, they're going to make it not voluntary. It's not going to be voluntary. Once they figure out people don't want to play this track and trace game, people are not going to cooperate. Right now they say you don't have to download an app on your phone. Well, your phone's already going to have what we talked about 2 weeks ago or so in this show, where we already have the phone makers. Google is working so the updates in your phone are going to give them the ability to track you further and part of the coronavirus tracking, tracing, Keep America Safe and Healthy project. So you already have that in there. You're not protected just because you don't download some app. This idea that they're not going to keep surveillance on people who don't willingly cooperate, of course they will. Just yesterday, before I came here, there was a guy at our front door at our home, and he had on gloves, and he had a little iPad, and he did blah, blah, blah on the iPad, knocking on our door. And I don't know who he was. We don't open the door if we don't know who it is. We just don't do it. But it looked like someone, and they're starting contact tracing here in Dallas, probably a contact tracer. I wasn't even going to think about answering him if it was. And I also don't even want to be in his list of people who said, no, thank you. I don't really want to be hassled and tracked and traced. But this gets to the argument about, do you have the right and liberty to live in liberty, or do you just do what the government tells you? It can save one life. Well, so could banning all driving. Save a lot of lives. But we don't surrender our liberty to do that. We don't do that. Next one is, people say, well, go along with tracking and tracing because it's just for this crisis. It's not forever. It's just for this crisis. People, this is a virus. This is a virus that has mutated 30 times already. And there will be more viruses. There are new viruses all the time. Viruses springing out, just endlessly available, endlessly turning out new viruses all the time. There will be a new virus. There will be a new problem. And the government will say, well, this virus is, this is really bad. You thought COVID-19 was bad. This is way worse. You're going to have to, kick in that tracking and tracing again. Got to bring it back. Once we agree that this is a normal thing to do because of a health crisis, we're never going to get rid of it. there's never a time. This whole idea that we're doing this just for now, not forever, assumes that there'd be no other virus. And by the way, none of these tracking and tracing things, at least that I've read, has an exit strategy. None of them say, and don't worry, we're only doing this through the end of 2020. Or we're only doing this through 2030. There's no end game. There's no exit strategy. There's no way out. They're starting something that will never go away. And you have to understand that. If you're okay with that, knock yourself out. I am not. And I do not believe, even if you think right now, like my happy friend who's a state rep, who says, oh, we have a Republican governor, he wouldn't misuse this. Okay, but someday you might have a, Governor Whitmer of Michigan type governor in your state who would happily use this data, who would happily make it more forceful, who would happily extend it, who would happily misuse it because they're leftists and they believe in the control of government over the people. That's what leftists want. And the last one, I will say that I hear people saying why tracking and tracing is just going to be a, not a big deal. They say, well, we can't deal with this coronavirus problem and do nothing. We can't go back to normal. We have to do something. Well, A, we are doing something. We have hydroxychloroquine, which is working like a charm for people, for doctors willing to use it. We have people working on a vaccine for those who want to go that route. And there may be more than one vaccine developed. They'll be tested. We are doing all sorts of things in this country to protect with the coronavirus. My point is, we do not have to go to a program that forever surrenders our liberty, that surrenders the concept that you live in liberty, and you give that up to say, instead where I live, instead what I do is I just sit in my home and wait to be told whether I can leave, whether I have to quarantine for 2 weeks because somebody who was in the grocery store last week was with me. Folks, I want to remind you something. When people say we got to change this, we got to do something and not go back to normal. Try to remember, back to January of this year, January of 2020, you would get up in the morning, you would go to work, you would go to the grocery store, you would go to your tennis lesson, you would go to your friend's house for book club, you would go outside to the park and go bike riding, you'd go out. You did not spend time thinking, I wonder about the health status of this guy next to me. I wonder if he's got the flu. I wonder if she's had her flu shot. I mean, here we are in this restaurant. We're kind of close. I don't know if they had a flu shot. I don't know about this person. You just live life. You had the unspoken assumption of the risk. Of course, we go outside. That's what we do. We go outside and we go to restaurants and we go to businesses. We just take the chance that maybe someone we will see has some problem that is contagious. We just take that risk. You hear people saying, wonder where I caught this cold. Well, I probably caught it from my friend Susie's daughter, so-and-so. I probably caught it somewhere. People recognize it's part of life. We don't have to surrender our liberty to a tracking and tracing system because we have a new virus coming along. All of this is springing from the astonishingly exaggerated models to start with that got us down the path thinking that we have to do something radical. We do not. And I'll tell you, in Oklahoma, they're starting this, so now they're all celebrating Oklahoma because these tracking and tracing companies getting contracts of big states with governors are then putting in place. Now they go, oh, we'll help you reopen school. So to reopen school, everybody has to get a test. Everybody has to get a coronavirus test. Everybody has to get an antibody test. Everybody has to prove they've had their test. And so you see, we've gone from a society based on freedom to a society regimented and controlled by the government. Folks, tracking and tracing, I don't care if you happen to be one of the people who thinks it's a swell idea or maybe it's needed. It is an imposition on liberty, and the people in this country who still value liberty, who still love freedom, are exactly right to speak up and say, no, I'm not complying. And believe me, despite my goody two-shoes friend who's a state rep who's saying, oh no, everything will be fine, the government will crack down on people. The more we agree tracking and tracing is okay, they will crack down on people who didn't get the virus. They've already been talking about requiring a pandemic passport. You have to have a passport to prove that you do not carry the virus, that you have either had it and you have the antibodies, or you've had a vaccine, or else you can't travel. They're already talking about that. Do not take this lightly as oh, isn't this nice, government trying to help. This is government taking away your freedom. Two last points on this topic. One is, amazingly, Dr. Fauci came out recently, and when they were talking about opening up the states, he was worried about opening up too soon. He said the coronavirus has a phenomenal ability to spread like wildfire as lockdowns are lifted. Fauci is committed to keeping America afraid. Fauci is committed to keeping this country locked down as long as they can. His preference, my assumption, he hasn't said these words, he loved the country mostly locked down until a vaccine comes out. That's what he has in mind. So I got to tell you, this contact tracing stuff, very, very, very scary. And by the way, one other thing that came out is very, very interesting. CDC is a change in their policy because they were originally saying, coronavirus, it can live on a surface for days and days. They're now saying, actually, that's not true. Coronavirus spreads pretty much through human contact. They are withdrawing. They're saying it actually does not spread easily on contaminated surfaces. Tracking and tracing is a huge step to loss of liberty in this country.